Welcome to This Club Sucks, grief support for parents after the lasagnas are long gone. I am your host, Melissa Monroe, here with my co-host, Alexandria Seamock. Each week we record our child loss chat on Twitter Spaces, where we explore topics around grief and trauma. Whether you are a bereaved parent, want to support bereaved parents, or exploring other sources of grief, we'll be here holding space after the lasagnas are long gone.
Oh, this club sucks.
Welcome to my very first child loss chat with me, Melissa Monroe, my stellar co-host, Dr. A, and my guest, Laura Malcolm, the founder of InKind. We'll be discussing how to support grief after child loss. If you wouldn't mind posting this out on or tweeting this out so more people can find it, you can do that if you pop the little box with an arrow at the top of this field. You can tweet out the space so others can find it. I really appreciate you all being here. These spaces are being recorded and will be a part of my upcoming podcast, This Club Sucks, which I hope will be live by the end of next month. Okay, so for those new to Spaces, we're going to start with a little chat by myself and Laura, and then we'll open it up to Q&As. When we open it up to Q&As, you can request the mic at the bottom left, and keep your mic muted until we call on you, and we'll get started. So, someone who loses a spouse is a widower. Someone who loses a parent is an orphan. But losing a child is so unimaginable, there is no English word for it. Maybe the Germans have one. They seem to have words for inexplicable feelings. Our culture is fairly grief illiterate in general, and most of us feel powerless to support a friend whose child died. I just made a few notes of some things that really helped me after the loss of my child in 2013. The most important thing is listening. You don't need to know the right words to say. There aren't any. I've never met a bereaved parent who said, these words really help. There's words that are neutral. There's words that are hurtful, but there's really nothing that's going to be a game changer. So just actually listening. Don't offer advice. Don't proselytize. Don't tell them what to do or how to handle it. Don't flinch if they cry or curse the heavens. Don't offer similar experiences. Just listen. By listening, so many of my friends figured out what was going to be helpful to me by listening. My favorite example of this is my friend Deanna was over the week after my daughter Alice died and overheard someone saying that we had a massive trash problem. There had been hundreds and hundreds of people through our house over the course of several days, and we had far more trash than trash cans, and there were raccoons tearing it apart, and it was really a problem and one that we were just not equipped to handle. So Deanna listened, and she heard this, and she packed up all the trash and took it to the dump, which is really walking your talk when it comes to saying, I'll do anything. So listening, saying their name is really important. I know Teresa knows this. I had so many people who said to me things like, I'm afraid to say her name because I'm afraid, it'll remind you of her and it'll make you sad. I didn't forget that my child died. I'll never forget. And no other person can make me cry. The death of my child makes me cry. I have yet to meet a single bereaved parent that isn't aching to hear their child's name. So anytime you can do that is wonderful. Food. This is where Laura's going to pop in. Hopefully, food's great and it's necessary, but some days the bereaved will need more food than others, depending on how many out-of-town grievers are coming in, where the services are, when the services are. And oftentimes you end up with more food than you have refrigerator space. So finding out when they need the food is really great. And when we bring Laura up to talk in a second, this will, she can describe her service, InKind, for you, which really helps with that. One of the best things my friends did for me was to elect point people. The bereaved are completely overwhelmed, and if it is an unexpected or tragic death, they don't even know what day it is. So if you are a person that's close to the bereaved and have experience planning funerals, you can offer to help. I had a core group of very dear friends who did this for me, and I honestly have no idea what I would have done without them. I had another friend, Janet, who elected herself to be the food point person. Her husband brought over tables and chairs to accommodate all the visitors. There was so much food, and we needed it because we had so many people, but we didn't have anywhere to put it. So Janet kind of took stock of, what was going to go bad first, what should be served first, how much should be out, found refrigerators of neighbors to store the food in that we couldn't use right away, had people bring coolers. She just took over all the food related problems, so I didn't have to know anything about it. Because ideally the bereaved parents are only dealing with the big whopper questions, memorial service questions, burial questions. They're going to be too overwhelmed to deal with, do you have a cooler? Where's your cooler? All that kind of stuff. So that was really, really helpful for me. Filtering information is also a paramount importance. If you are a point person, try to handle as much as possible without asking the bereaved. They have so many horrible decisions to make already. I remember my dad coming to me and saying, and I love my dad, so I was able to be direct with him, saying like, oh, we need a cooler. Should I get it at Walmart or should I get it at this place? And which place is closer? And, we weren't expecting Alice to die. It was a complete shock. And I just looked at him lovingly, I hope, and said, Dad, I have to decide whether I'm cremating or burying my child. I don't give a fuck where you get the cooler. You like to be in charge of stuff. You can get the cooler wherever you want. Not only filtering what's coming towards the bereaved person, but also helping to filter out. The bereaved parent is not going to have the wherewithal to individually tell hundreds of people details about what happened, details about the services, details about what they need. They're just not going to have the capacity to do that. So this is something that can be helpful if you're not close to them. You can help disseminate the information that you get from a point person. That said, you should never, ever, 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 ever take it upon yourself to be the one that announces it on social media unless you are next of kin or the point person of the next of kin. This was a huge problem for us. It was a huge problem for many bereaved parents I know, where either distant relatives or folks that didn't know them that well took to social media. When this happened to us, we were still desperately trying to get a hold of certain family members, and Alice's godmother and people we barely knew were announcing it on social media, which was obviously not ideal. So that filtering information was just really important, not only filtering what the questions that are coming toward the bereaved parents, but helping to filter it out and contacting a point person who's close to the family for that information. Another thing you can do right after is send photos of the child that's passed, if you have them. To this day, there's nothing that makes my day more than coming across a photo of Alice that I've never seen. There's almost always photos of a child or anyone that's passed at the memorial service, and you may have a gem that the parent doesn't know about, especially if it's an unexpected death. So if you have photos, you can send those. And the last tip I have for right after the event is to offer to drive the bereaved, either to the services, anywhere they need to go. I drove to a yoga class about a week after Alice died, and I needed the yoga class, and the yoga class really helped. But I had no business driving a car whatsoever. That it was really dangerous. And I don't think really any bereaved parents should be driving right away. They may think that they can because you're in shock, but it's generally not a great idea. And then, 3 things that you can do after the aftermath is touch base at random times in the weeks, months, years after. I had many friends that reached out to me months after, and they were so apologetic. I'm sorry I didn't reach out earlier. But for me, it was amazing because it gets really quiet after the lasagnas are all gone. The grief really doesn't even set in sometimes for months afterwards, especially if the death was a shock. So having that support come in months later when it was so quiet was really helpful. And in the beginning, there's so much coming at you, you can't keep track of it anyway. And I felt guilty that I couldn't respond to everyone, and it was a little overwhelming. It was appreciated, and absolutely reach out right afterwards if you can. But if you can't, it's, in my opinion, it's still okay to reach out months later. And for some people, I say just set an alert on your phone for like some random amount of months later or random times during the year, and reach out and say, "Hey, how are you? How is it going for you today?" Because those really made a difference for me. And other things you can do after the aftermath is if they do any kind of fundraising in their child's name, participate if you can. If you don't have money, you can donate time. If you can't donate either one of those things, helping them publicize it really makes a difference. Anything you can do to help them memorialize their child so that they know their child is remembered. I know it was a huge fear of mine, and I know from talking to hundreds of bereaved parents, it is probably universal. The fear not only that you will forget details of your own child, but that your child will be forgotten and their impact forgotten. And lastly, if you can remember the child's birthday, death, anniversary, or other important days to the family, that makes a huge difference. It doesn't have to be on those days. Sometimes I don't tank on that day. I tank, it's 8 days before, it's 5 days later. So any time during that period is really helpful. So I want to bring up Laura now so she can tell us about her story and what prompted her to start InKind, and how InKind can help support not only families who have lost children, but who are grieving in general or in crisis. So Laura, welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for having me. And it's obviously a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I love so much of what you shared in your recent blog post about how to support families. And I know that's part of what you covered here. And I was taking some notes because so many pieces resonated with us in our story. And even though our stories are slightly different, we lost our daughter also in 2013, but to a late-term stillbirth. And so first baby and 35 weeks and everything ready to bring her home, and went through that same loss. And it's hard. I there's so many, like, what do I wish? My I had an opportunity to hold my daughter and be with her, though she wasn't alive, and get that very short period of time, and I think a little bit of preparation before we spent that time together. And Um, but then we went home, just like you did, to an empty house that was not that we never expected would be empty, and surrounded by friends and family around the country that were struggling to figure out how to help us. Because we didn't have any living children at home, it was just my husband and I. We actually really we pushed everybody out. We really closed the doors and said we're going to need support in ways that aren't in person, because I had just given birth and was obviously dealing with everything that goes along with recovering from a full term pregnancy. In conjunction with this big loss that we were experiencing. And but the responses are the same, right? Everybody wants to know what to do and how to help, and the food still shows up, and a lot of questions behind the scenes of people texting one another and trying to figure out, what do they need, what do we do? Much like how you lost Alice, stillbirth is not something that's talked about. I don't know if you knew about sudden unexplained death of a child before Alice died. Did you? Was that even on your radar? Because stillbirth wasn't on mine.
It was, oddly, because I had a patient who lost. This is a very weird story. My dear friend from acupuncture school came to me February of 2013. She was very pregnant. She came in for an appointment. She came in sobbing, and her neighbor and dear friend had her neighbor's daughter was 2 days older than Alice. My friend was sobbing because her friend, we'll call her Renee. Renee went in to wake up her daughter in the morning, and her daughter was dead, and it was SUDC. So I started, and I believe Renee was pregnant at the time, and then ended up miscarrying that baby, if I remember correctly. So just, loss upon loss. So then I started seeing Renee as a patient, and I cried and cried and cried. It was like I couldn't help but put myself in her shoes, because her daughter was 2 days older than Alice, and then not 6 months later, it happened to us. There are other families now, but at the time, the director of SUDC Foundation told me that I was the only person in her 20 some years of working with SUDC families that knew someone it happened to before it happened to them. So that was an odd situation.
Yeah, so that is odd and is unique, because we don't talk about it, right? We want to think that certainly there cannot be inexplicable death of our children, and now and I know that SUDC impacts kids throughout their life, and stillbirth is similar. I really was conditioned to believe that you get pregnant and then you hit a magical 12-week mark, and that's it, you're in the clear, and not certainly that 1 in 26 pregnancies ends in there's so many clinical terms, fetal demise at the end. So it was just a shock. It was a shock to everyone. And so there's so many things that I love that you talk about in the ways to help, and that there are no words. And one of our favorite cards, because it just started coming, right? The meals and the cards and the flowers and everything. I didn't get out of bed for days, but my husband was just constantly going, and the doorbell was ringing, and he was collecting things and bringing them back and setting them up in our space. And I got a blank card from a cousin, and on the back it was like, there's nothing to say. And I thought, wow, if that isn't the most poignant sympathy card.
That's incredible.
That was just it. And then, I'm just realizing now that that same cousin then 7 years later went through a full-term stillbirth just this last summer. And so it is amazing, now we've raised some awareness, and but still you don't expect it. Nobody expects it. In our house, because we were having a lot of people stay away, one of the things, our equivalent trash problem was the water in the flowers, because we had so many bouquets of these beautiful flowers, and I have a photo of them, and they just lined every surface. And then 3 days later, the water was brown in all of them. And so I always say when you're going to visit someone who's grieving, like that's the thing that I say do that no one else will have thought of. Grab the bouquets, rinse out the vases, stick them back in, and then somebody won't have to think about that. But
My friends Angela and Alyssa did that for me, and it made a huge. They tossed out the dead ones, changed the water, gave them aspirin or whatever you do, and I agree that was a huge help for us as well.
it makes a huge difference. So there are all the, there's these little things, and it's like we can sit here all day and say, here are things that you can do. We know that it's not going to fix it, right? None of this fixes it. Nobody can fix it, but there certainly are things that we can do, and there are needs, right? We had a meal train set up for us, and it was great. But I'll talk about sort of where its shortcomings were and how that led to Give in Kind. But my best friend called maybe 10 days later and said, we're dropping by with breakfast in half an hour because I know that you are not eating unless a meal is showing up at your door. And therefore, I know that you're not eating breakfast. And she was right. We were not eating unless food was at our doorstep in that cooler that somebody knew to say, we're dropping off a cooler and food will start appearing at 5 o'clock every day. And so at 4:30, my husband and I would go and we would turn off all the lights in the house and we would hide in the bedroom and then we'd listen for the cooler and then we'd sort of come back out and turn on the lights because I did not want to see or talk to anyone. But what we really found was that we had, we're thinking about ourselves, of course, but really seeing this impact on all of these loved ones that couldn't figure out what to do. And it was creating all this work. And because it was Los Angeles in 2013, on-demand services were just starting, right? So Instacart and Uber Eats, and there were ways for people to participate in a meal train in a more sort of modern way. Because my aunt in Washington State and my mother-in-law in Connecticut just didn't know how to get us dinner. They wanted to participate in the meal train. They didn't know how. And so we built a platform called Give in Kind, and it's 6 years old, and it's a modern meal train meets Caring Bridge meets GoFundMe. You can do all of those things on it. You can create a care and support calendar. You can sign up to take someone a meal, or you can send them a digital gift card. You can post updates. You can comment and share those photos. And it's been incredible. We've had over 2 million people come to support someone through one of these major life challenges over the last few years, and child loss is a big one. It's a big grief and loss is about 20% of the time that people are coming to give support on Give in Kind, and seeing that every day, right? Seeing these stories of kids and babies and pregnancies, and it's heavy, right? Dealing with our own, and you now work with a lot of people who've also been through these experiences, and maybe some of the others here can relate to continuing to sort of immerse yourself in this space, seeing these sort of losses every day. But one of my favorite sayings about grief is that it doesn't ever get any easier, but we get a lot stronger, right? The weight of the loss does not lessen. We build the muscles that allow us to carry it around a lot better. And
that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's been incredible. It's been incredible getting to have that sort of impact on others.
So it's been 6 years now, Laura?
Yeah. Yep. Give in Kind started in 2016, and we have 2 healthy little boys at home now, which I'm so grateful for, and see that impact growing every day.
It's an incredible story, and just really admirable what you did. And I'm also glad that you shared the part of your story where you did not want to talk to people right away. It's I just read an article somewhere, I think Dr. A sent it, on the ways we're expected to grieve. And I know I've talked to Teresa about this as well. It was very odd to be the recipient of all that projection. I don't know if you felt that. There were, I had friends that said, I can't believe you're not a heroin addict, and other friends, not so much friends, but acquaintances that expected me to, quote, get over it. Oddly, no one that expected me to, quote, get over it had children. So not all of my single friends without children were always so worried what to say. I don't have a child, so I don't know. I said, don't worry. The only people that have ever said anything horrible to me have all been parents. Strangely, it was almost as if it was too unfathomable for them to think of, and they just wanted me to be better so that they could think that they were better, is the sense that I got. But these expectations of how a bereaved parent is supposed to behave is so toxic. Ricky Gervais's Afterlife show I love because it shows, an quote unheroic portrait of grieving, but it's real and it's valid, and also, like you said, you had just given birth. That's a whole different situation. You're dealing with physical symptoms yourself. So I'm glad you brought that part of your story up, because these expectations of how bereaved are supposed to act are incredibly toxic, and they need to go the way of the dodo. Dr. A, you had a question.
Yes, I have a question either for you, Melissa, or for Laura, or for anybody else who's been through this. Is there anything at all? I mean, I lost a baby when I was still pregnant, but I don't think anybody knew about it except the father and, my doctors who took care of me. But is there anything at all that you can say to someone in that position? Or, are we just supposed to stand there and look at them? What can we say?
Oh, that's
Laura,
a
you want
tough.
to take this one?
It's so tough, because I think it's it's so close to what you said early on, is that I can list 100 things not to say, but it is really tough to think of what to say. I was just sharing some tips for ways to offer help recently, which sometimes can be better and more practical. I guess maybe it depends on your love language, right? Mine is acts of service. And so I really struggle. I swear sometimes I built Give InKind just for me. I struggle with what to say. I am not good at saying things. Everything feels like a platitude, especially in these really big situations. But what I have practiced saying is like, I'm going to the grocery store and I'm going to drop off a bag of groceries on Tuesday at 4. Can you tell me 3 things that I can get at the store for you? And sort of giving them those prompts. So for me, that is how I respond in some of these situations, is much more practical. And that's what I could have used in that moment. Maybe Melissa has more thoughts on things that are more thoughtful to say on an emotional level.
I think saying I don't, there are no words. Just know that I love you. I have no words, but I'm going to look around and see how I can help you. Do you need a ride? I think Laura's right. The prompts were really helpful. I was in shock because our death was completely unexpected. And people were asking me what I needed, and I needed a lot of things, but I was not able to articulate them. So as I was saying in the beginning of this space, the folks that just showed up and listened, they could once they got me talking, they could hear like, oh, okay, she's going to need a ride to this, or that they could use someone to go to the store, or they could use someone to take Grace to school so she doesn't have to deal with 500 parents asking her what happened. They were able to sort that out. If like Laura, you didn't have people around you as much right afterwards, I think Laura's absolutely right. That the people who just said, and this is what I do, I'm an acupuncturist. So if I know someone that loses somebody and they live near me, I offer them what I know I can do. I can give you a session. I can help you find a therapist if you need that. I can pick up your kid from school and take him to the park for 2 hours. I heard you need the oil change on your car. I can pick your car up and go do that for you. I offer specific things if I can. And, but the words, there just really aren't any. And I think the best words are, there just are no words. And I'm so sorry. And listening.
So I guess what both of you are saying is it's better to just to do something than to say anything.
Yes, I think in this case, love really is an action.
But I do think there are lots of things that saying something is better if you don't feel like you can do something. Of course, saying something is something. Not anything, but what Melissa said. I'm thinking of you. I heard from a lot of people that I have not heard from in a very long time, who said just that. They loved us and were thinking of us. Sharing stories was really interesting. Everyone from my high school chemistry teacher to great aunts who had not spoken about children or pregnancies that they had lost, who opened up to me, that really made me feel not alone at that time, because it's so lonely. And so I think that was really helpful. I will give a plug for another company called Grief Coach, which is text-based grief support, and not just for a griever, but for those that love them and support them. And they offer some incredible prompts and texts, and you can let them know all the significant days, and they will text you and give you ideas about the words that you can share to the griever that you love, because we know that this is such a complicated issue.
What's the name of that again, Laura?
Grief Coach.
I just put it in the nest. I found it. Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
That's a great resource. Thank you for that, Laura. Artisans, I'm sorry I don't know your name, but Artisans of the Spirit. Did you have a question or something you wanted to say?
Yes, I'm actually called Shadow Fox, and I would just like, way back in the day, I mean, they really didn't have any major assistance. At 26 weeks of gestation, my son didn't make it, and gave birth, the whole 9 yards. I was not as far along as Laura was, but it was talk about empty arms. At the time, I couldn't even hold. They wouldn't even allow me to hold my son. They whisked the child away. So it was really kind of like a double whammy. And at the time, there was a counselor that had come in when I was in the hospital. But after that, there was absolutely, positively no follow-up. There was no one to call. It was a very trying time. Friends at the time, because we were younger, like we were 19, so they didn't have the wherewithal to lend assistance either. And I think at the same time, during this exasperating and horrific time in my life, I do think that you guys are on the right track as far as actually doing something. In 2017, my daughter at age 26 passed. And that was, so there was experiencing on both ends, two sides, empty arms, and then an adult child. So I think in the process of grief, like after everything is said and done, like 10 days later, 7 days later, when I know someone is experiencing this sort of grief, I like to take them a meal, or sometimes just go and sit without actually even saying anything. It could just be a hug, sometimes you just being and sitting. For me, that helped. Everybody's different, and sometimes you have to ask. There are no words that are going to help. there just aren't. It's my thoughts are with you. I'm sorry for your pain. And that's it. But I thought I would share that because at that time, I'm grateful that there's many people like you guys that are stepping up and offering different platforms and services and stuff, because when I had originally gone through this, there wasn't anything for me.
That breaks my heart. There are no words that to twice in those two very different ways, manners of child loss is just devastating, and it breaks my heart that you didn't have the support you needed. And you're right, we're not great at it now, but at least we're talking a little bit about it now, and there's some places that you can go. But I've met other women that were kind of more my mother's generation who lost children, who, until I lost a child, and my child was 2, but they hadn't talked about it for decades, until they reached out to me after the loss of my child. And they report very similar things, as you, Shadow Fox, that there was just nothing, that the child was whisked away, that no one offered them really even postnatal support, for the ones that had stillbirths. It's just, it breaks my heart, and my heart goes out to you, and I appreciate you sharing your story, and I hope you'll keep coming back and joining us.
Well, thank you. I think that society also sometimes categorizes us into some of the, as some secret club that nobody chooses to belong to. And in some cases, not all, but it kind of seems like we lose those friends, or we're shunned, because it's like, oh, gee, maybe we'll catch it or something. And whatever it is, you can catch a death, I guess. But yeah, I noticed there were, even colleagues of mine completely stepped back. And I think possibly because they didn't know how to interact, what to say or what to do. And I think that if we can kind of all wrap our heads around this, sharing from our experiences, what was either done or not done to help us, I think we can find some solutions to help, because people really are asking, how can we help? What can we say? And when they don't have that information, they just back off.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I agree. And it does us such a disservice in so many ways that we don't talk about it, right? There's the generational piece. So for me, it was my finding out that my grandmother had a late term stillbirth, and my mother had a brother that was buried in Minnesota, and my grandmother never spoke about that. Again, I heard those stories from so many friends, parents, and yes, an entire generation that never knew that they weren't able to hold their babies, right? Sometimes they didn't know the gender of that baby that they delivered at 40 weeks and was whisked away. It's terrible. So there's so many reasons why not talking about it creates a society where we are even more lonely, right? Even more isolated. And it conditions you to think, because you don't know that it's happened to anyone else, you think, that you're the only one, and so therefore you must have, in my case, right, what did I do wrong? And Melissa, when you were talking about your friends who maybe didn't give the best responses, and sometimes those were parents, that breaks my heart, because I don't know how much you experienced this, right, but it's like people are really skeptical that healthy full-term babies just die. Just like I think people are pretty skeptical that healthy children at any age die. And I've lost friends in an argument about that, right? And so I don't know if you experienced that, right? But what happened? But what do you really think happened? We can file that in the list of things that people shouldn't say. But I think that is a byproduct of the fact that we don't talk about.
I'm fortunate that did not happen often. with me. It did happen a couple of times. Both people were parents. Both people had children around Alice's Alice's age. And what was pretty clear to me at that time was they were so freaked out. I got the sense that they were like, shit. I thought that this didn't happen. I thought that once the child was 6 months old or however old, there was no crib death. I didn't know this was a thing that I had to worry about. And so they were coming to me with, do you think it could have been this? Do you think it could have been this? Do you think it could have been this? Do you think it could have been that? Which was so triggering to me because I was already doing that to myself. Meanwhile, there was an autopsy and a thorough months-long death investigation. And I finally I can't remember, one person I talked to directly, and then I think I had my point person just kind of disseminate the information. Like, if the doctors don't know, if the medical examiner doesn't know, if the scientist doesn't know, Melissa also doesn't know. And your questions, though well-meaning, are hurtful. And actually, I thought they were well-meaning at the time. With a little perspective, it wasn't so much well-meaning as they were freaked out for their own child, which is understandable. But the person who just lost their child is not the person to go to. They were looking to me to ease the fear that they didn't know that they needed to have, and that was rough. And I kind of just had to put up some boundaries around that. Anna in peril. Hi. Do you want to take the mic?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, I am a mother that lost her 6-year-old son to SUDC. Me and Melissa are in the same group. But yeah, it really resonates everything that you're saying, especially, like you said, all these questions that we got, and our process was 11 months with no answers, to only get the answer that there was no answers. So it's a very difficult time when you don't know anything yourself, that you have a bunch of people asking you questions. And like you said, a lot of my friends disappeared because I think there was this fear of, oh my God, like this could happen to me.
That's heartbreaking. Yeah, I know that there's several parents in our SUDC group that lost friends because of it. I didn't lose many friends. I did lose one, but it was a different situation and some like fraudulent behavior on my behalf that ended that friendship. But for the most part, I was lucky that the boundaries I set up worked. But yeah, I know. In Anna, I guess. Do you want me to call you Anna?
No, you can use my real name.
Okay. I didn't know how deep undercover we were going. I know Heather and I both know some parents who've lost several friends because their boundaries didn't work. I do think that in my case, I'm an older mom, and Heather's not as old as I am, but also probably on the older side. I think this was particularly challenging for some of the younger parents in our group, because some of their friends didn't even have kids. Some of their friends weren't married. Some of their friends, they weren't really all the way adults yet. And so there's just not as much life experience to know how to be supportive. Every day I'm grateful that I was an older mother, that if this had to happen, I was an older mother, because the people who were supporting me were a little older. Everyone's been kicked around a little by life by that point and is a little wiser about how to handle situations. That said, one of the reasons I'm doing this, the main reason I'm doing this, is because we are so grief illiterate. And I think most of the information that I found myself having to give the people that were supporting me and that I needed would have just been so much easier had we all known before, but we don't talk about it. Like Shadow Fox said, we are probably the first generation that really started sharing and are often accused of oversharing. But I think we might have to overshare for a while to get the pendulum back to the middle. Yes, Dr. A.
My family was the same as everyone who's mentioned so far. I had no idea if people had lost babies, pregnancies, anything. It was only by doing a genealogical search, for example, on my great-grandparents, that I found out my great-grandmother had lost at least 3 children after they were born. So why do you think our whole society is so uncomfortable? I mean, they just don't talk about these things. No one in my family ever did. I know I'm older. I'm going to be 66 in a couple weeks. But why do you think our society doesn't talk about losing children, losing pregnancies, stillbirths? Any ideas?
Laura, you want to take this one?
Because we don't like to talk about death at all. We
Yep.
don't like to talk about death, and to talk about the death of a child is almost like, would we be willing it into existence, right? And I am certainly not going to tell a blissfully pregnant woman in the late stages of her pregnancy, like, well, just so you know, make sure that you're tracking fetal movements and, all these sort of things, because I am, like you said, in this club. That sucks. I'm not going to tell you about it, but there's a lot of us. We don't like to talk about it. We don't like to sit with our older loved ones while they are dying. I'm not remembering now the names of this beautiful couple, and I will find it and send it as a follow-up to Melissa so she can share it. And they're both in palliative care, and one was dying of cancer, and her partner was sort of tweeting through the whole journey. This was maybe 2 years ago. And she shares an audio at one point of the death rattle. She says, this is happening. The death rattle is happening. This is what it sounds like. And the discussion that came from that, of so many people saying, I sat with an older loved one and I heard that noise. I thought it was just them. It scared me. Right. We put these, people who are dying on a normal track, I guess, away, and hospice care. And we've lost sort of this community that goes through the life cycle of birth and death all together. And so it's like, if we don't like to be and sit with death when it is, sort of quote unquote expected or normal or acceptable, then we're certainly not going to talk about when children die.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we are a youth obsessed culture. The amount of money we spend trying to look younger, the amount of power and attention we give people that really don't know what they're doing. These major platforms that we give them, when really a lot of what they're doing and saying is ill-advised and in many cases dangerous. So you can't really have a youth-obsessed culture that is also adept at aging and grief. And we certainly just can't, I know I've talked to Teresa about this. I felt, and I write about it in my book that I'm shopping now, I felt like the poster child of everyone's worst nightmare. When I would walk into a room, the entire temperature would change. That has gotten better, thank God, because that was really hard to deal with. I don't blame these people, by the way. It's not their fault. But the whole temperature of the room would change. And I could feel all of the, like, shit, I hope that doesn't happen to me. Shit, that poor woman. That's the woman that lost her kid. And I thought, oh, my God, I cannot be the woman that lost her kid the rest of my life. I mean, I will always love Alice, and I will always remember Alice, and I will always do things for her legacy, but I did not want that death to be the defining moment of my life and the thing that's like sucked the air out of the room, or I wasn't going to be able to have a normal life. But I think we're a youth obsessed culture, and it's just at odds with being okay with aging and grief. Heather, did you have anything to add about that? Oh, I'm sorry. Shadow Fox has her hand up. I'm sorry.
Yes, I think where society plays a role is because society has not given dignity in death or in the grief process. I believe because we fear death, and what we fear even more than death is the death of a child. And there's something that I've kind of been looking at a little bit, and it's like, especially after my daughter had transitioned, was people would come to me, and it's just a word, and I don't mean to trigger anybody, but it's just a word, and I think the word is perhaps outlived its shelf life, perhaps, because when my daughter died, I didn't lose her. She wasn't a set of keys. And when people were coming and trying, saying, "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss," well, in essence, yeah, it would be a correct statement. But for me, that word just really triggered me even worse, because it was like I didn't lose her. I mean, even if it was my turn to watch her, I didn't lose her. She passed. She died. And I think this is where we have removed or tried to cushion as society in giving that dignity in death. So I'm sorry your daughter passed, or I'm sorry for your pain. Those, I think, would bring the context to that intention more light than "I'm sorry for your loss." And I know I catch myself if I'm getting ready to say it, because I just think that words change, and I think if we're trying to bring attention, that this is what we're experiencing. Pain. It's like across the board. I didn't lose my daughter. She was not a set of keys. So I just thought I'd put that out there, and maybe, maybe it's something we can work on. I mean, it's not like, maybe in 100 years we'll forego that word perhaps, but that's the word that really triggers me.
Thank you. You guys had some of the most wonderful, wonderful answers. I mean, it probably is all of it together. It applies to my family and how many generations before us. So I really appreciate your responses on that. Thank you.
I'm not sure who is next up to speak. Is it Heather?
I do agree with the term of losing, and I do that still. I still say that I lost my son. I don't like to use the word die. That's something that even me, having gone through that, struggle to use that word and say that.
Yeah, it's definitely not the verb you want to use when your child is the subject, is it?
Well, and I think that speaks to the idea that all of this is so complicated, right? And that is why there is no right way that we can say on how to express your condolences when someone has gone through that loss. And maybe the deeper we're in it, right, the more in the weeds and the more experience we have, the more it clouds that. Maybe that's why I struggle so much with knowing what to say, because I feel like there is no right answer. So the words that trigger us may all be different, and I think the best we can do is listen to all these different things. Right? If there is no one answer, everybody here is learning and listening and sharing those experiences about what to say and how to take action to give that support. And I think that's the best that we can do.
Absolutely. So before we wrap this space up Laura, if you could just go over some of the features of InKind for us so that we all know how we can utilize InKind if we have a friend in crisis or a bereaved friend. Tell us some of the features that we can use and some of the ways that we can help the people that we love.
Absolutely. So it really, as I said, it started from my own wanting to make a more modern meal train is kind of the best way to put it. And so it has everything you might expect from all of the different platforms that people might use in a time of crisis. And crisis is everything from death to the cancer diagnosis to surgery, recovery, even just postpartum support. So you have a care calendar where you can create signups for people to help with meals, rides to the doctor, childcare. You can create a wish list and share most needed or most helpful, ideas for ways for people to help. Because most often than not, it's actually not the person that is going through the crisis who is setting up their InKind page. It's that close person. It's that point person, the first one who says, we will create this space where everyone who wants to help can. You can connect to GoFundMe or connect to PayPal. You can share updates and post comments with photos. And so it's really meant to be that hub where everyone who wants to give help can go there and can help however they want to in the way that's meaningful to them. I think that we wanted our loved ones not to feel left out. For example, if the way to support us in that moment was a meal train, and we had friends and family who couldn't figure out how to get us a meal train or get a meal to us, we really felt like we wanted to offer them other ways that they could give their support. So we also have a lot of content. It's very specific to the situation. And so when you are on a InKind page for somebody who has lost a child, you're seeing articles there about how to support someone through child loss, some of which were written by Melissa. And I think that education is a really important part of what we offer. We worked with families who had sick children who expressed what they wished that they could say to the ones who wanted to support them. And so we turned those into articles and put those on those InKind pages so that when everybody who wants to help shows up, they also are sort of gently reminded of the way that you should approach a family who has a child going through cancer treatment, for example. So that's it's InKind. It's free. We think it's pretty easy to use, and so it's there for any time you have a situation to recommend it or use it yourself.
It's an amazing resource, and I'm so proud of you, Laura. It really is amazing that you can do all of those things in one place. It also drastically reduces the burden of the person in crisis or who is grieving to have to answer all of those questions. It allows all of the people who really want to help to be able to do so without feeling like they're bugging you. And it's just an amazing resource, and I'm so proud of you, and I'm so grateful to you for being our first guest here on This Club Sucks.
Thank you, Melissa.
Oh, I think we will wrap it up here today. I just want to thank my fearless co-host, Dr. Alexandria, for adminning for me. If there's stuff there up at the nest, if you want more information, thank you for doing that, Dr. A. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us and sharing your story and your amazing business that's helping so many people. And thank you to the rest of you for coming and for speaking and sharing your stories. And we hope to see you all next week.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on the show or my other work, you can check out thisclubsucks.com or melissamariemonroe.com, or you can find me on Twitter at @MMeaning. May you experience some gentleness on your path today.